Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Daniel Davis Deep Dive Intel Briefing. What we learned this week. I know everybody doesn't have a chance to watch every show, even though I kind of wish you would, but I know you don't always, and I don't want you to miss anything here. So we kind of got the most important things of the week that we covered and some new information that you haven't seen yet in this Intel briefing so that you are set to go at the end of this week and ready to start next week on top of everything. One of the biggest things that happened this week was the UN General Assembly, where there was lots of big speeches made. Remember, 156 countries have now officially recognized a Palestinian state, which, of course, greatly angers the Israelis, especially Benjamin Netanyahu. That's the last thing that they want. And if anybody thought that Netanyahu might be a little bit conciliatory or might soften his tone, we're sorely surprised and disappointed when it came time for his UN General Assembly meeting yesterday. We've got a whole show that we streamed on his comments. You can go see that in the description. Just click on that if you want to know all about what he said there. But the bottom line for that is that he was kind of in your face and threw down a gauntlet to just dare everybody in the West to continue to challenge him, and that he was defiant, that he was not going to give in on a single point, etc. Now, after that meeting, however, he was in New York and he met with some influencers, some Israeli American. I don't know. I think that they were primarily, I don't know if they were just pro-Israeli or ethnic Jews. I'm not clear which it was. They didn't identify them a lot in this video, but in any case, there were definitely pro-Israeli influencers, young people, met with Netanyahu. And I'm going to show you, first of all, what one of the influencers said and note their view on some other Americans who have a different view.
You and the Likud party are cut from the same ideological cloth as Trump and the GOP in America. And so specifically with Charlie Kirk's assassination, who was a big mentor of mine, he's my first mentor in the space, evangelicals, from all my research, evangelicals are the reason that Israel has been supported in public sphere outside of just Jews. So with Charlie's assassination and with the kind of trajectory that we see with like Candace Owens and Tucker Carlson, I guess I'm curious about what's another game plan if we lose evangelical support for the state of Israel. What's our backup plan to be strong, like outside of the diaspora?
So she mentioned they're outside the diaspora. So that implies that this group is I think they're all Americans. Some of them may be from Israel, et cetera, but all together they are in America, and they're trying to ask him what they can do in the U.S. to put forward Israeli positions. Now, there's not a thing in the world wrong with that. You can lobby for anything. We have free speech in this country. So no denigration whatsoever on what they're doing. But be aware, though, where Netanyahu is coming. I'm going to get to his answer to her question in just a minute. But one of the first things you can look at right away is that her assessment is that the Trump and MAGA is cut from the same cloth as Netanyahu and Likud, his political party, saying like they're one and the same. They just kind of accept that. And of course, that's what I consider part of the problem, in that there is not merely a blurring of the lines between what is in America's interest and what is in Israel's interest, but a removal of the line. Like in the minds of many, there is no line, not even a diffused one. They're just all one and the same. So whatever's good for the Likud party and for Benjamin Netanyahu personally in Israel is identical and synonymous with what's good for the United States. And I'll just tell you categorically, that is not true. There's a reason why George Washington, in his farewell address, warned about the dangers of a permanent alliances. He said, you should never have permanent friends or permanent enemies. That is the best advice we could ever have gotten, and has absolutely echoed throughout the centuries that is very, very wise and solid advice. You should take, because the conditions are always changing. I mean, the conditions that existed in George Washington's day aren't anywhere near what the conditions are today. They're radically different, and they've shifted many, many times radically over those 2 centuries. So you must always take into consideration what is in the best interest of our country at any given time. I mean, some things we have done that with. I mean, look, we obviously went to war with Great Britain. That was part of the Revolutionary War. Then there was the War of 1812, and things have kind of changed since that time. So, there can be some, what was an enemy is now our closest friend in Europe, etc. And we have to continue to do that, though. And so what we shouldn't do is just say, because Israel has been a friend of the United States, and it has in many respects, that's legit. But because it has, then that we just eliminate any more analysis, any more examination, and a constant updating of the conditions. Should we be a blank check for the state of Israel? Is what they're doing in our interest? If there's not, then we need to change policies, or that we need to say, that's not my deal, that's your deal. You want to go down that path, you're a sovereign country, you can. We're not going to put any handcuffs on you, but we're also not going to put jetpacks on your back and help you do something that in the process of doing it could be bad for us. And of course, I will argue that much of what we've done for a long time, certainly not just since this war here started on 10/7/2023, but even going back further than that, we have continually, actually the line was beginning to be more blurred prior to 10/7, and then it has just vanished, first with the Biden administration and then now with the Trump administration, in that we just say, yep, that's it. No more line. It's just whatever's good for him, we'll do. And it's not. It is not. It is graphically not. The United States launching military strikes in contradiction to the United States Constitution and in violation of the 1973 War Powers Act, explicitly violation, is not in American interest. America was not threatened by Iran. America has overwhelming combat power and military power, diplomatic, economic, in every way you want to measure over Iran. There is no reason on God's green earth that we should have used military force against them. That was for one client and one client only, and it had nothing to do with America. It was for Benjamin Netanyahu. That's a fact. So the fact that we did that in pursuit of what he decided was in the interest of Israel, and I can certainly argue that's not even ultimately in their interest, but that's neither here nor there because I'm not an Israeli. That's for them to decide. But it is for us to have an opinion on what's good for America. And there are others that are now then, because these lines were eliminated, at least at the government level, there had been the creation of new lines outside of the official policies in the government in the United States. And specifically mentioned there was Candace Owens, Tucker Carlson, and apparently Charlie Kirk, before he was assassinated, he had also started moving back away from this blanket support to Israel. And many others are going in that direction because they see that the actions that the U.S. government taken are not in support of American objectives or in pursuit of our interest globally. And so they're moving further apart. So she's asking, this influencer was asking, well, how can we counter that? What narrative can we use? And Benjamin Netanyahu had an answer.
We talked about the woke right, and he said, I call it the woke Reich. That's a brilliant observation. The woke Reich, because these people, they're not any different from the woke left. I mean, they're insane, they're Louis. But they're actually meeting on some of the things. And what we have to do is we have to secure that part of the base of our support in the United States. That is being challenged systematically. A lot of this is done with money. Money of NGOs, vast. Money of governments, vaster. How do we fight back? Our influences. And secondly, we're going to have to use the tools of battle. And the most important ones are the social media. And the most important purchase that is going on right now is followers. TikTok. TikTok. Number one. And the other one, what's the other one that's most important? X. Exactly. Very good.
Okay, a number of things that are problematic with that. Here is Benjamin Netanyahu, the leader of Israel, sitting in New York City, and he is sitting there talking to influencers in America who are trying to influence people towards him and away from what other Americans are saying, actually calling Candace Owens and Tucker Carlson the woke Reich. I mean, he absolutely said, they're insane. They're insane. They are insane. And that is a slap in the face to the millions of Americans who follow those two. You can probably add Megyn Kelly in that group as well. So is he calling everybody on that side? Because if you're claiming on the one hand that Trump and GOP are synonymous with Likud and Netanyahu, you're going to have a problem, because a lot of the people that follow those guys are in the GOP. In fact, the vast majority of them are. So you've already got a problem with your definitions, because you're saying the one hand that these guys are great, and in the other hand, some of these guys are insane, like millions of them. I mean, you can see a problem with that right away. So here's Netanyahu now demonizing large sections of the United States. We obviously stand quite in contrast to that. We're probably not big enough to even hit the radar. If we were, I'm sure we would have been lopped into that same group. That's fine with me. I have no problem with that, because I will sit there and tell you that based on evidence, based on an analysis of what's good for the United States, it is not good for America to go down this path. And I would say to those influencers, you need to look at the evidence. Don't just listen to the words of Benjamin Netanyahu. That is like the worst thing you can do, and the best thing he wants. He wants you to only pay attention to what he's saying. That's the reason why he went on in that clip to say, we have to combat this with the tools of war. His words, the tools of war. And then he goes on to tell you that he's talking primarily about TikTok and X, because those are two of the biggest social media platforms. TikTok for the younger group, and X for the older baby boomer type people that are incredibly important for his support. He's got to maintain, especially the baby boomers. That's, I think, one of the reasons why he highlighted X, because that's where most of them go for a lot of their daily information. So he's wanting to influence them through that. And he's like, let's don't talk about the evidence. Let's don't talk about the facts. Or if we do, let's talk about select facts like 10-7. Keep ripping that over and over, and then repeating with the clearly and routinely debunked lies. 50 babies being burned in ovens and beheaded in front of their, all this kind of, so many things that never happened are, there's of the most horrific, human violated terms of these grotesque things that were allegedly done and weren't. He keeps holding those up like a red flag in front of a bull. And it's foolish, because there were, 1,200 Israeli people killed on 10-7, military as well as civilian. Now, some of them, according to some of the reports, were actually done by the Israelis to try to keep them from being hostages. But we'll talk about that another time. For right now, no question about it, there was a massive terrorist attack conducted by Hamas and Palestinians on that day, and at least over 1,000 Israelis were legitimately murdered by these people. Focus on that. Focus on what happened. You can just be honest and then actually do yourself a favor, because then when people do some analysis, they can find out, yep, that's what happened. But instead, they want to exaggerate situation and just talk about this horrific stuff that was done above what actually was done. So now that when people examine and they find out, like even the Washington Post and New York Times of all people have debunked this and said, no, there's no evidence those things ever happened. But never that he doesn't care about that, because you understand this. Netanyahu does not care about the facts. He cares about influencers. He cares about changing perceptions to allow him to continue to do on the ground in Israel what he wants with no problems in the United States. He's not worried about other countries as much. I'm sure he would like it, but it's not a priority for him, because he knows that he can lose every country in the United Nations. What is it? I think there's a total officially of 196 total. He can lose 194 of them. And as long as the one he keeps besides himself is the United States, he can continue on. Because with that diplomatic, with that economic cover, with that military support, he can continue going on if he loses everybody else. I think that's one of the reasons why he was so in your face, defiant to everybody in the world, and called them out during his UN speech, because he doesn't care what they do in response. He cares what America does. So that's why he's focused on this. And what these people need to be focused on, aside from the concept of what is good for our country and what is the benefit for America in terms of policies, is look at why people like Candace Owens, why people like Tucker Carlson, why people like we put on our show here, Ambassador Chaz Freeman, Scott Horton yesterday, because we see what's happening on the ground in this grotesque, real, very much validated horrific carnage that's being levied upon the Palestinian population under the claim that we're going after Hamas, but Hamas has been severely degraded, at least in military capacity. Their numbers have continued to maintain about the same, because every time you kill one and kill 10 innocent people in the process, you're going to recruit naturally other things. But the capability that these have, and even if their numbers are the same or vastly less than they were before, that's not even at risk. They don't even care about that. The only reason they care about Hamas right now, and they do care about Hamas, is because that provides the justification for them to continue to go to methodically destroy the Gaza Strip. Evidence confirms that their primary interest is to destroy the capacity of the Gaza Strip writ large to even sustain life, so that the only thing left to whatever survives of the population is to exist in a tent amidst the rubble somewhere. And their hope is, it appears to me, that their primary objective would be to cause such outrage around the world that finally some country or countries say, all right, fine, just out of humanitarian concern, we'll open our doors to them and you can start shuttling them out. That's what they want, because then they want to ethnically cleanse the entire Gaza Strip of all Palestinian people. And I'll just throw this in there, that also includes Christians. Interesting that woman there, that young lady said, hey, we got to be careful, because what if we lose the evangelical Christians? Because that's one of the biggest supporters we have. And to my evangelical brothers, although I primarily consider myself just a Bible-believing follower of Jesus Christ, I don't even like to use that category of evangelicals because it has so much baggage that goes along with it. But nevertheless, certainly many of the churches are Bible-believing. But to my brothers and sisters in Christ, I would say, why is there this much compassion for our fellow believers who are amidst the rubble, whose bodies have been shattered? People continue to die in large numbers. Our own co-religionists, our own believers are in the midst of this, and there's no concern at all. I mean, it would be one thing if I can see that the evangelical community writ large would say, it's terrible what's happening there. Benjamin Netanyahu should do what he's doing because of Hamas and 10/7 and all that. But I'm also, heartbroken over my fellow brothers and sisters in Christ that are also paying the price. But there's none of that. There's none of it at all. They don't care. Maybe some of the reason is because then that would set up a really problematic dichotomy that you say, okay, well, this and that and the other Palestinian I care about, but the rest of them can go to hell, don't really care. You can't really say that out loud either, because does that match up with Jesus' teaching? Understand, the Bible clearly says they will know you are my followers by your love. Not by your anger, not by your hatred, not by what you're against, but by your love. Turning the other cheek. Considering the needs of others is more important than yourself. All these kinds of things that are saturated throughout Jesus' teaching. At no point does he say, hate everybody, that you don't like anybody who does something against the book here, kill them. Obviously, that never happens. And that's another dichotomy with the evangelical group, that at some point they're going to have a come to Jesus meeting, forgive the pun there. It's not going to go well, I don't think. And I just hope that comes sooner rather than later, though. But those are some of the big issues that we need to understand here, is that this is Benjamin Netanyahu trying to influence the popular belief in the United States so that the government continues to give a blanket approval to anything that he wants, provide however much money that they want, however many weapons that they need, and all the diplomatic cover to protect against everybody else in the world. That's what they're trying to do. So they are demonizing Americans, well-known people such as Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, and they are trying to continue to divert the evangelical Christians into subordinating their own interest, their own spiritual interest, in lieu of and deference to the Israeli desires of Benjamin Netanyahu. That's what it is, folks. You need to understand, in a nutshell, that's what's at stake here, and that's what he's trying to do, using American citizens to further his own agenda. You don't have to like it. That's the fact. All right, let's move on to some other things. There was another actually big bombshell statement that was made out of Belarus yesterday. So obviously Belarus is probably the number one ally of the Russian Federation. Vladimir Putin, Alexander Lukashenko have always been tied at the hip ever since this war began. and they're constantly making comments together. So when he speaks, might make some sense to listen to him when it has something to do with what he discussed in a 5-hour meeting he had with Vladimir Putin right before this. It made a few headlines in America, but not very many. And I think that's a mistake because there was some pretty big news that came out of there. And in combination with other things that we learned this week, this gives you a kind of picture of where things are and where they're probably going. And there could be a big change coming up pretty soon. First of all, let's get to it. This is Lukashenko yesterday talking to the reporters after his meeting with Putin.
There's a good proposal on the table. President Putin and I discussed it. I won't talk about it. The president will say that himself. A good proposal. The proposal for Ukraine, which, among other things, was heard by Donald Trump in Alaska, was taken to Washington for consideration and discussion. A very good proposal. If the Ukrainians don't accept these proposals, it will be like at the beginning of the Cold War. It will be even worse. They will lose Ukraine.
So you see right there that, listen, he's saying, hey, there's a proposal on the table. Apparently this was told to Trump in Alaska. And he said, it's a fair proposal. According to Russia's interpretation, certainly it's not going to be agreed to in terms of fair by anybody in the West, but that's neither here nor there, because what is very much here and there is the realities on the battlefield. And as I keep telling you over and over graphically and showing you graphically, all of the decisive advantages are on the Russian side. So there's no reason why anyone in the West should confuse themselves and delude themselves to think that they can compel compliance on the side that has the most power. Ukraine is hurting Russia. They continue to fire long-range weapons, including some domestically produced drones that are having a real effect. I saw yesterday that Russia has now gone to a rationing situation in many parts of the country, a number of parts of the country, in fuel, because 17% of their refinement capacity has been taken offline by these attacks. Not a minor amount. And it now is having a physical impact on the amount of fuel that's able to go. They have stopped exports, I think, through at least the end of December, and then they'll reassess. Of course, they're trying to get those things done, but it's a meaningful hit. That's nearly a fifth of all of their capacity. Now, of course, you can certainly understand that they'll ration to the civilian population before the military will be shortchanged 1 gallon of fuel. So that's not going to have any impact on the actual war, but it's certainly causing some pain among the Russian population. But when you look at the overall in terms of the manpower, the numbers, the drones, the aircraft, the glide bombs, the missiles, the strategic drones, the tactical drones, all of that stuff together, of course, is irrevocably and decisively on the Russian side. They're aware of that. They're not fooled like the West is trying to fool itself. So now then, apparently, Putin sounds like, from what was described there, and we'll see when this becomes public, but Lukashenko saying it out loud after having met with Putin implies probably something's coming pretty quick, that he's basically prepared to issue an ultimatum. Now, I thought, and I think I said on this show here during this past summer, earlier in the summer, about the midway, that I thought that the deal that, especially around the Alaska time, I said, this is probably going to represent the last chance for diplomacy. And if this is not accepted, then I think it's going to turn into, okay, now then we're just eschewing any kind of diplomatic possibility, and we're just going to win on the battlefield. You've seen John Mearsheimer on our show, I think as recently as this week also, just say, yeah, that's what's coming. There's going to be a victory on the battlefield. There's no more possibility. Now it looks like that Putin may be close to saying that out loud by saying either you do this, or as Lukashenko put it, we will take all of Ukraine. Now, you may say, well, that's just his being bluster. They only took 1% of their country in the past, like almost 2 years in terms of territorial acquisition. And they can want to do that, but they can't. I'm not convinced of that because from what I see, the way that they're conducting their operations on the front line does not match the industrial capacity that they have ginned up to. And what I suspect could be coming, for example, this Oreshnik, it's now been a year since it was employed. So they have done nothing but continue to put them in serial production. We don't know the number, but it's some probably decent number have been continued to be produced. So they're now stockpiling them. We also know that they're producing apparently something close to 1,000 of these long-range Guarantus, the drones, per day in Russia. but you see occasionally they'll get up to, like they did 800 the other day, but usually it's like 200, 300, 400. It's not a small number, but not anywhere close to being as much as the production capacity. Ergo, the logic is they are stockpiling those in large numbers. Now, with their the Ukraine side's limited air defense capacity, right now they can handle those kinds of numbers. A fair percentage gets through, but a pretty sizable percentage, bigger than what might seem reasonable given the alleged disparity in air defense, is shot down. It's actually for very many things, not just air defense missiles. It's lots of other ways, machine guns, other air defense, artillery, lots of things go into it. And they get a pretty decent percentage out. It's not enough, because that's why Russia keeps just going more than they have, and it hits all these places, and they still cause damage throughout the country. But now imagine this. Imagine on the day that Russia says, okay, we've stockpiled tens of thousands of these things. And now then we're going to go, like in one massive night, one blow, we're going to send a wave of 1,000 of these things, and they're going to spread throughout. And then 20 minutes later, another wave of 1,000 come through. And then 20 minutes later, another wave of 1,000 come through. They could launch 6, 7, 8, 10,000 in a single night. And I promise you, part of it even is not even the amount of ammunition that the Ukraine side has to shoot this down, but you also, in some of these, especially when the missiles, you've got to, it takes time to reload the batteries of the Patriots and other IRIS-T and other kinds of air defense systems. And if you have that many coming across, and especially if there's plenty of missiles to go along with it, you can't even reload fast enough. So that on that second, maybe third wave of things coming through, when that fourth and fifth waves come through, it's nothing. All 1,000 could conceivably hit their targets, and it could just cause wipeout, devastate. We've never seen that. We've never seen wave after wave after wave of these kinds of strikes. We've just seen single waves, relatively speaking. They come in serials, but it's small numbers, so that the total, the most they ever had was 800 in a single night. Usually it's less than that, so the waves are pretty small. But if you have where they have massive waves, and presumably they have those in stockpile, so that could change a lot. And if you start adding in Oreshnik missiles, they could just flip a switch, and it could just be catastrophe falling on the Ukraine side. We have all, and including the Ukraine side, has kind of gotten into their mind this mentality of how that we can absorb these. So this is kind of all these things that are going on in the front line, especially in Pokrovsk and Kupiansk, which is where Russia continues to make the most progress. Even when there's a small, in north of Pokrovsk, there is a Ukraine counteroffensive that might have a whole Russian pocket cut off pretty soon. But in the city of Pokrovsk itself, Russia has now moved into, and even more into, the entire western part of that country. Yesterday, they announced that we're waiting to get confirmation of that. Meanwhile, in Kupiansk, they continue to move further inside the city. So those two pretty major cities are starting to fall, but it's still relatively slow. It's happening, but it's slow. But now on the day that mentality, you can handle that, you can move resources around or reserves. But when there is this massive attack like this, which apparently Russia has the capacity, it could collapse their entire defense in a minute. And one wonders if that's in the minds of Vladimir Putin, as discussed through Lukashenko, because he's talking about you'll lose all of your country. So to make that statement when you've only taken 1% in 2 years, that implies that you have something else in mind, that maybe we're going to do something different. And I don't know if they're going to do this, but if that would be a material, massive difference on the front line, because nobody's mentality is used to that. Everybody has gotten really comfortable with how things have worked for the last 3.5 years. The Ukraine side, they can handle all of these. I think there's, depending on the day, 5,000 to 6,000 FPV drones or bomber drones, et cetera. What's going on the tactical front? Lots of, I think, 40 to 80 airstrikes, glide bombs, et cetera. So they've kind of gotten used to that. That's now just the normal. They can deal with that. But if you overwhelm the systems with the senses with something much bigger, that's where you have a chance to actually have a complete break. And of course, the casualties alone from that much firepower could dwarf anything that we've seen so far. So I wonder if that's something that's have in mind, because if Putin is making this claim that basically I'm going to give you an ultimatum, you can either surrender or we're going to take your whole country implies that there's something different, because otherwise, that's, I think the BBC, or maybe it was the MI6 estimated earlier this summer that it would take like 4 years at current pace to be able to win. And I don't think that that's what Putin has in mind here. But we'll wait to be seen. It's something that we need to pay attention to. But Zelensky, on the other hand, doesn't seem to be taking this very seriously. In fact, he seems to be saying, not only are we not going to agree to that, I'm not ultimately even going to cede any territory at all.
Are there any territorial concessions that you would agree in order for to get a deal that ends the war?
We will never recognize these territories, which are temporarily occupied, like the territories of Russia. We can't do it. Situation. If tomorrow will be a ceasefire, everybody's standing. If we don't have power to bring back these territories, so we are ready to speak about it. We are ready to get it back sometime in the future by diplomatic way, not with weapon. And I think this is good compromise for everybody. It's been that we have to decide such things now in dialogue.
So, all right, let's break that down a little bit. So, on the one hand, he seems to be, for the first time in a long time, a little conciliatory. Okay, well, we don't have the power to get everything back right now, so we'll get it back diplomatically. So, what he's saying is, I'm willing to bring the war to an end and sign some kind of document. He's implying, and as long as I retain control over this part of Ukraine. He said separately that I would have an election after that. Once there's a ceasefire, I'll have election. I don't think I'll run for it. I'll believe that when I see it. But in any case, he says he wants something. He wants some kind of deal that leaves the rest of Ukraine on the other side of the line of contact, because apparently that's what he's willing to concede, what he doesn't have control of. He did not say anything about giving up the Donbass, the part that he currently occupies that Russia has said is non-negotiable. Didn't address that, but at least he's thinking, okay, we'll give this up in theory, but we're not going to recognize it, that he's going to want the West not to recognize it, so that in the future we can get it back through diplomatic means. So what you're telling Russia, who, as I just described, is in the irrevocable power dynamic, that they have all the cards that determine who wins and who loses a war of attrition. You're asking them to agree to something that, okay, we'll give you about 40% of what you're asking for. Okay, fine. We'll submit to that 40% as opposed to no percent. So it's a big give from Zelensky's perspective. But you're asking Russia to agree to something that says, okay, you are not going to get any of the territory where ethnic Russians are in the remainder of the administrative borders of those 4 oblasts, which is in the Russia's constitution. And there will be no protections for the other ethnic Russians who are in, I think it's the next 4 or 5 oblasts to the east, to the west of that. And you're not even going to get recognition for these territories here. And we have the express intent to collect them again later by other means. So the very reasons why you went to war there will continue to exist afterwards. Now, what possible reason would Russia have to agree to that? I mean, you would literally, from a position of power, say, all right, I tell you what here's the things that you want. We'll make sure you don't get 60% of those, and you'll agree to this, and I'll consider it my duty and honor to agree to you losing 60% of what you're demanding. I mean, why would anyone do that? Yeah, here's Zelensky, who's on the exact opposite end of this power dynamic, and he's still demanding things. Now, imagine how much less the guy who is in the dominant position is going to concede such a huge percentage of that leaves this guy in power. They're simply not going to do it. It's not even on the table for discussion, and we should recognize that. Somebody else who doesn't recognize that was yesterday. At least the video was released yesterday. But today, Zelensky was even more boisterous and in your face on Russia.
Реально хворі війною. І чи можливо їх вилікувати? Це питання. Єдине, що може примусити цей російський вірус війни зупинитись, це сила. Сильні рішення, сильна допомога. Ми говорили про це в Нью-Йорку з багатьма нашими близькими партнерами. Звісно, говорили з президентом Трампом. Президент Трамп дуже добре поінформований по ситуації на фронті про те, що росіяни роблять і в чому вони намагаються усіх обманути. Ми говоримо з Америкою про конкретні речі, які можуть зупинити цю війну. Рецепти є. Важливо, щоб було реалізовано те, про що ми домовляємось.
So you see there, he's talking about, my conversations with President Trump. They understand that. So he's got his own plan. Now, again, you're talking yesterday to today. One hand, you're talking about maybe having a negotiated settlement and you'll cede certain amounts of territory, at least on paper. But then the next day you're saying, no, this side is sick with war and we've got to stop them. And I'm working with President Trump to get that done. I mean, that by itself is like, which is the real Zelensky? Now, you factor on top of that something he said a couple of days ago about telling the Russians they need to make sure they know where their bomb shelters are.
Prime Minister's office.
Yeah, they
Kiev.
attacked.
So, if what would you tell somebody who works at the Kremlin today? Would you tell him to make sure he knows where the nearest bomb shelter is?
First of all, they have to know where their bomb shelters are. If they will not stop the war, they will need it.
If they don't stop the war, they'll need it. So apparently he's implying that they have all this really big strike capability that they're withholding, that they're not using, and those darn Russians better understand a big threat to it. So it's almost like beforehand that he gave this something close to an veiled ultimatum to Russia. You either end this war or I'm coming after Moscow. And I'm going to get there. You better know where your bomb shelters are, of course. Naturally, that was mocked on the Russian side. Dmitry Medvedev, who can always be counted on to provide a little dark gallows humor when stuff like this comes out, did not hesitate to call out the absurdity of that and to say, by the way, I shouldn't have to say this out loud, but whatever Zelensky may have in mind, and he does have some long-range drones. They have tried many times to hit Moscow, and most of them have been shot down. Some have actually struck targets on the outside of Moscow. But should he ever actually get something through and hit something of meaning inside of Moscow, there's these things called the Oreshnik missiles that there is no defense against. And it doesn't matter. I'm talking Zelensky's bunker probably would not stop the kinetic power of those missiles. So not sure that's really something he wants, because whereas the bomb shelters might work for those in Moscow, they're not going to work. Okay, great. Gary, as usual, is on top of it and fed right there. You can see what he said there. So he wasn't exactly quaking in his boots. And he said, the bomb shelter won't protect. Russia can use weapons. That's, of course, he's talking about the Oreshnik. That's probably not bad advice there that the Ukraine side needs to keep in mind. If they have something that can reach and do damage in Moscow, would not help the war effort out at all. In fact, it might even sign his own death warrant. That's just the reality and the ugliness of war. But one of the things that Zelensky mentioned in that first Axios clip that I showed you there, he's talking about his personal relationship with Trump and how Trump is, he thinks he's got a good deal worked out for them. Well, David Petraeus, also this past week, one of the things we discovered was that he thinks that Trump may have been a little naive.
I very much agree with what the ambassador just said in many, many respects, with one exception, and that is that I think that the EU and NATO have done more and more credible actions than I think he was giving credit for. Again, you noted, I was in Brussels. I met with the chairman of the NATO Military Committee, met with a number of EU officials and President von der Leyen's office, and then in the office of the foreign minister, if you will, and so forth. But my conclusion for this group, keep in mind I'm a former soldier and spy master, not a former diplomat, so this will be somewhat blunt. But my view is that President Trump rightly tried to use his personal relationship with President Putin to bring the killing to an end. He literally rolled out the red carpet, had the big meeting in Anchorage, and Putin has answered by sending the most drones and missiles into Ukraine skies on several different occasions.
Now, here's the problem with that. That last part is accurate. That is, I'm not sure it's entirely accurate to say that's how Putin responded, because Putin was always doing that. I mean, they've been doing these air attacks across the country for years. I mean, really, since I'd say about October, November of 2023, all the way through current. So almost 2 full years they've been doing this on and off, sometimes higher level, sometimes lower level. So it was nothing new. So if you want to call it an answer to that, it preceded the question. So you can do with that whatever you want. But they have ramped it up. And so I do think that there was a message in there that what President Trump, as Lukashenko mentioned there, the Russian side did convey in Alaska what their conditions would be, what they're willing to, how they're willing to end the war, what they need, what they require. And it's part of the weirdness. I don't know if it's an absence of ability to understand, whether it's a lack of willingness to acknowledge what was said. I don't know. But of course, after that meeting, Trump said, well, I thought we had a deal, which is apparently not the same deal that Putin had in mind, because Trump seemed to think that there was going to be a deal almost like the Zelensky version, where Russia would not get 60% of what it was asking for. But Russia apparently has not changed it. I'm guessing that their deal that he was referring to, or probably that 12-point plan that Russia gave to Ukraine on their second of the current round of meetings in Istanbul, this 12-point plan, where they're basically a recitation of what the deal that Putin gave in June of 2024. So again, they never changed their minds here, and they never changed their objectives. So now I think that you see that there was a message. It was that Putin was saying, look, our capacity is continuing to escalate. So the imbalance I keep talking to you about isn't static. It continues to advance in the Russian favor. And I think he's demonstrating that and saying, we can, in a sense, with actions, not with words, he's saying we can do this the easy way or the hard way. And we would prefer to do it the easy way. But as Trump always says, he's very polite in their conversations and they're very respectful, but the actions are concrete and saying, this is where we're going. And if you don't agree to these terms here, we're not going to agree to anything less, because we don't have to concede 5%, much less 60%. They're not going to do it. So that's one of the things that Petraeus doesn't seem to recognize. And so he says, yeah, Trump tried to do it. He tried to say, hey, we can do it this way. But now this personal interaction between Putin didn't work. And now that's his answer, implying then, and he went on to say in his other remarks, that we need to do other things. And we need to step up the sanctions. We need to step up the weapons that we give to Ukraine, et cetera. And that's what it bears repeating again. That's I'm sorry, I'm just going to have to use this term. It's kind of a sickness of the foreign policy elite in the Western world, not just the United States. But the fact that, and you heard him bragging about all these people that Petraeus at the start of that clip that he'd been talking to, Ursula von der Leyen, NATO, Brussels, certainly Kiev, all these people, he's on all these different places. He talks to all these because they listen to him. They're actually asking his opinion. And he is saying that we need to just do more sanctions, more of what didn't work, more weapons, more of what didn't work in the past 3.5 years. There's no rational, logical view, especially when Putin is demonstrating that the balance continues to go out of whack against their side. And you're suggesting that with far, far fewer inputs, you want to try and repeat what has already graphically failed in the past. It's no logical sense, and yet that's where we are. And Trump, as he always says, I'm unhappy with this. I don't like what Putin's doing, etc. And I think it was this week also, the Russian ambassador to UK was interviewed, and they asked him, what do you think about Trump's being unhappy with Putin?
Trump is saying he's very disappointed by Putin, that Putin has let him down. That he has a great relationship, but it doesn't make any difference. So he's clearly annoyed.
And so what?
Is that the point? Is that your position? So what? It doesn't matter.
Do you think we should be guided by his controversial statements each time? Not at all. We are in operation, a serious operation. Situation in Ukrainian conflict, it is fundamental interest for us. We needed to resolve it once and forever. What President Trump is doing is, of course, this is for the benefit of the military-industrial complex of the United States, and it is easy because they are selling now this weapon for European money, and it's big money, really. Of course, this does not bring a settlement closer. It is only delaying all of that.
Listen, you don't have to be a Russian apologist or any even pro-Russian at all. In fact, you can do the contrary. You can hate Russia. You can despise everything that they're doing in Ukraine, and you still have to acknowledge, if you're being honest and accurate, what he said there. He said all of these things that they're doing, all the things that Petraeus said we want to try, all the things that Lindsey Graham says that he wants to do, all these alleged, which still haven't materialized, additional secondary sanctions on other countries, China, India, Brazil, etc. All these additional military packages, so that whatever the European Union can come up together and whatever they can scrap together to try and put something on the table, these $1 billion per month that allegedly the United States is going to give to Ukraine. All these things do is just, as I put it in different terms, I say all it does is increase the cost of Ukraine's ultimate loss, which is already baked in. Can't be avoided anymore. Can't be avoided. So while we go for the militarily and economically unattainable objectives to try and repeat things that have already failed in the past, all we do is increase the loss to the Ukrainian people, to the Ukrainian country, their territory, everything else. Listen, this comment by Lukashenko, you can never take anything at face value, but you have to put it in context of what we can observe. And when he says that this deal that Putin is apparently on the table, that is already on the table, apparently known behind the scenes, both to Ukraine and to the West, that it's either this or all of Ukraine will be lost. There's reason to say maybe he means that. And maybe they have more capacity than we have come to believe so far. Problem is that because we haven't seen it demonstrated, there's nobody in the West that believes this. I've had so many conversations with otherwise very intelligent people, open-minded people, etc. And they, especially in the United States, but some in Europe as well, they are absolutely convinced that Russia can't win this. That this analysis of I think it was in the BBC during the summer, of it'll take 4.5 years more for Russia to be able to just get the Donbass, forget about even going to the Dnieper River, much less all of the country, meaning that's a bridge too far. They don't even have the capacity to do that. They believe that. So they feel comfortable and confident in just going, yeah, whatever he said. We're going to keep doing this. And what we're going to do, and I think their mentality is, because they believe that Russia can't, then they say, but so what we'll do is we'll just keep this death by 1,000 cuts strategy going, and we'll keep the pipeline open, and we'll keep hurting Russia. So at some point, apparently, they'll get tired of it. The cost will be too high. Ukraine will have enough of these long-range drones to get better technology, the better able to evade the Russian air defenses, and they will take that not 17% of their fuel capacity refinement, but down to 20%, 30%, 50%, in time 60% maybe, and just devastate the Russian economy. And then they'll have to pull down. They'll have to back off, and then they'll give us what we're asking for. I think that's the mentality here. And if what they think is true, it's at least an entertainable idea, because you can say, yeah, maybe in time that'll happen. But even that perversely says, yeah, and in those years, I'm cool with more tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian men being killed in combat. I'm okay with additional generations of Ukrainian men paying that price. Because even if you say, yeah, just imagine the absurdity of the mentality here. Let's say that it's that 4-year period. They actually believe that, and their calculations are based on what they've seen on the battlefield. That's how long it would take. This is what Russia's doing, is all it can do, but it will keep doing it, and it will keep nibbling away until it gets set in 4 years. And then they're saying that maybe sometimes in that 4 years that Russia is going to, because of the difficulty with their economy back home, that they won't be able to maintain even that, and then at some point they'll just peter out. And then what? What do you think is going to happen then? They're just going to go away? That they're just going to say, all right, boys, pack up your gear. Let's head back to Russia. All right, here's your country back. It's kind of bombed up a little bit, but it sucks, and we don't want to do it anymore, so we're going to go home. Does somebody think that's going to happen? however many more years this takes, that's probably hundreds of thousands of men who are alive as I make this video, who will be dead then, on top of all of these casualties that have existed before. So the best case scenario is that now then the line, instead of being where it's at right here, will be somewhat further to the west, even in your best case scenario. And what? You still don't have the power to push Russia back. So even wherever that line is going to be, the Russians, even in that condition there, would then go to defense like they did in 2022 or 2023, late 2022. They'll start building defensive lines again. And now then maybe there'll be a pause where they rebuild their strength over some number of years. And then they would certainly continue on. They're not just going to say, all right, that's it. We're done forever. See, there's no logic behind what they're doing. They only have this idea that maybe sometime Russia could get tired, but even they don't follow that through. They don't even go through the logic of saying, and what would that look like? How would that help the Ukraine side? It won't. It'll just move the pause line, and I'll say the pause line won't be an end because Russia will have no motivation to actually end. At the best, they might do a temporary truce or something, or you have the case in the North and South Korea where they had the armistice. They didn't end the war, and Russia would probably say, all right, we'll just wait and we'll retool. I mean, even in that scenario, again, your best case scenario, Russia would at that point say, all right, well, let's lick our wounds for a while, rebuild our strength, and then continue on at a time of our choosing. Meanwhile, whatever's left on the Ukraine side, they'll have that same intent. But now then their manpower pool is now hundreds of thousands less than it was on top of where it is right now. So you can't ever get the combat power necessary, and it'll take a generation to even have the theoretical possibility of mounting something to drive the Russians back. And you're never going to do that because Russia has nuclear weapons. So even if you started doing something like that and had some success 4, 5 years, 6 years from now, it's not going to go anywhere any more than it did in the first time. So you really start to see, if you're being honest and looking at the logic behind all this, there is no path at all for success for the Ukraine side. But we're the David Petraeuses, the Ursula von der Leyens, the Emmanuel Macrons, the Keir Starmers are having this high rhetoric and this lofty statements about how they're doing the right thing, oblivious to the fact or unconcerned about the fact that they are sacrificing generation after generation of Ukrainian men and losing square kilometer after square kilometer of Ukrainian territory that will certainly never come back. There's no rational path to get that done. That is my biggest beef, as you can probably see, with everything that the West is doing. It is not built on any kind of rational analysis. It is just built on hope in absence of any fundamental reasons to do so. That's kind of where we are. Listen, the last thing I want to talk about here, I want to show one more thing from this past week, because I think it's really important, is that Russia is not so much focused on the territory as it is the fundamentals of the war and about the people.
Remember that in April 2022, Russians were ready to give back all the territory they had in exchange of a status for the Republic of Lugansk and Donetsk, and in exchange of neutrality of Ukraine, meaning that the territory has absolutely no significance for Russia. They don't want to expand their territory, even if it's definitely an advantage because it provides a so-called land bridge between Russia mainland and Crimea. This is definitely true. By keeping those oblasts, Russia keeps the Russian population, because those oblasts are mostly populated with Russian-speaking people, I mean ethnic Russians. Yeah. And the idea of keeping those territory is to avoid that those people are back into Ukraine, where the legislation makes a difference between ethnic Russians and other citizens of Ukraine, meaning that the ethnic Russians have less constitutional rights than other citizens. And therefore, that has become an argument for the Russians to say, well, if we give back those territories, all the population that we have on these territories will be back into a situation where they will be considered as second-class citizens. And we don't want that. The purpose of our operation is precisely to protect them. Therefore, it's not about territory; it's about protecting the Russians, and
Yeah,
that's
the ethnic Russians. And that's what's motivated Russia from the beginning, and they've never shied away from saying that. They demonstrated with their actions that's exactly what they mean. That's the reason why Russia actually provided significant material support for the separatists during their 8-year civil war. They didn't shy away from doing any of that because of the ethnic Russian aspect. That's the reason why they annexed Crimea in the beginning. In 2014, after the events of Maidan and the legally elected government was overthrown and replaced with a West-friendly one, etc., all those things keep having context, but it's always about the people that are in those areas. And it's funny because sometimes people say, oh, yeah, see, that's just like Hitler, the Sudetenland, and they're going to take care of the ethnic Germans, etc. That was a pretext at that time because they wanted actually a lot more. And they had the both from Mein Kampf, where they had specifically stated they had continental aspirations and a military to do it. And there were no nuclear weapons at that time. And none of those things exist right now. There are nuclear weapons on both sides. So even if Russia had the conventional manpower to actually make good on that and take all of Ukraine and take actually beyond Ukraine into any NATO territory, they would never be able to because we have nuclear weapons. And I promise you, we would not allow Russian conventional forces to start rolling across Poland, rolling across Romania, heading towards the German border and not use nuclear weapons. There's literally no chance. It's not even unlikely. There is this much chance. It's zero. Russia's well aware of that, any more than they would allow NATO armies to get onto Russia proper territory without using nuclear weapons as well. That prevents this from going any further. We're mutually deterred from insanity like that. Okay, we're mutually deterred from the logic of doing anything, but sometimes people do act in insane ways, which is why I say we need to get this war over with quickly and to get that opportunity to act insanely off the table as quickly as possible. But that's kind of where things are there. We're certainly going to continue to monitor that for you. But that in kind of a nutshell in this one show here really shows you what is at stake in this Russia-Ukraine war and where it may be going next. We will follow this for you. Last thing I want to talk about here is this meeting that's coming up in Quantico, which is about 30 miles south of Washington, D.C. here. It's a Marine base that this generals and admirals are scrambling to make plans to attend Hegseth's meeting. You may recall we've been talking about this. It was announced a couple of days ago that all 1 through 4-star generals and admirals and their key enlisted staff have been summoned to the Washington, D.C. area for some kind of event that Secretary of War Pete Hegseth has not announced yet. It's not said anything about. So we'll figure it out when we get here. Now, we've been talking about many things that could have been, but so far they have been incredibly tight-lipped about saying anything like this. We're talking literally hundreds of people here of the highest ranks all meeting down. Now, there has been some information coming out here in the news in the last 12 hours or so from last night I started seeing, where I don't know how much it is people are surmising. There are some people who are claiming they have insider knowledge. It remains to be seen. But some of the things that they're saying, apparently what's getting the most traction right now is that this is something of a pep rally where Pete Hegseth is going to give his warrior ethos, and he wants to look them right in the eye, and he wants them to see from himself, not just through a secure video teleconference like is the normal way to do a lot of these things where they get people, all together. He wants to have them right there in the room, feel the energy, etc. That's one version. I hope that's not the case. Well, I do and I don't. But part of me hopes that's the case because the alternatives could be worse, that we're going to do something stupid. There's also lots of information out there in here in just the last 24 hours that there may be some information, like Larry Johnson said on our show yesterday. Maybe there's military action in the offing for Venezuela. Don't know for sure if that's the case. That's certainly what's been reported. There definitely is military power being assembled in the area. I think that would be a huge mistake. I hope we don't do it. But that wouldn't seem to be enough to get everybody together. Maybe the people in that's I think the Southern Command is what has jurisdiction over that area, or any of the other military commands that have operational influence in that area. So the fact that it's everybody would seem that's not quite big enough to get everybody together. And you don't know what else may come. But some of the other things that others are speculating that this could be, a lot of firings could be coming. that they may say, hey, listen, we've got, as Doug McGregor says all the time, laments about this massive number of 3- and 4-star generals we have with a force of about 1 million. I think it's 44 4-star generals, and we had 7 at the height of World War II when there were 12 million men under arms, and we were fighting a literal world war. We only had 7 4-star generals. Now we've got 44. So this could be, and Hegseth has mentioned this. He said in the past that he's looking to call up to 20% of the general officer corps. Maybe he's going to say he's going to pull them all together and just explain what he's doing, or it's just or he may be saying, look, this is we need to know that you're loyal to this government. And I want to make sure, I want to look you in the eye and say, if we give an order to do something, I want to make sure everybody's going to obey it. These are all speculations. We don't know. I'm like I said, part of me hopes it's that pep rally kind of thing, that rally the troops behind and get loyalty or whatever. That would be dumb, but that's better than we may be ready to, launch some sort of military operation on a major scale, and we need you all on board with this or something. So I hope it's not that. You can't rule anything out. So Hegseth has apparently said that at the right time, he will tell everybody in public what he's going to do here. The meeting is set for Tuesday, the 30th of September, this coming week. So we don't have to wait too much longer. But listen, it is not only is this unprecedented, it's also troubling, because almost anything that it turns out to be is going to be like, you got to be kidding me. I mean, let's look. First of all, if it's the issue of, listen, I just want to look you guys in the eye, and I want you to hear from my own voice, the dynamics in the room. Here's what I expect, or whatever. That's something you do for a battalion. If you're a new battalion commander, you bring the battalion into the theater and you tell them all. That's normal. That's even appropriate and laudable. But not when you need to pull all of the commanders at the national level from all over the world to physically disrupt everything that's going on, aside from the cost of doing something like that. You're, number one, it's not a wise thing to do to get all that many high-ranking people in one place at one time. I mean, I don't know if there's any internal capability for any kind of terrorist attack, but that's one of my biggest concerns. There's not a lot of time, so I hope they're taking a bunch of precautions to make sure that the airspace overall, that area is completely secured and cut off, so that anything can't wander into that area, etc. Certainly the grounds, everything needs to be as secure as it could possibly be. But why take that risk? I mean, we do have the secure video teleconference system. It's routinely used. I myself, when I was on active duty, have used it into the White House itself in one particular occasion. So I've seen those, and it's normal. You can do that. You can get everybody together. You can look in the camera and you can talk to them, and you can see their faces on the other side. If you're just conveying a message, that's the way to do it, because this is not a battalion like you would if in that case there. This is something different. And to do that, I mean, number one, every one of those generals is going to know that that's a ludicrous thing to do. And they're going to be aggravated. They're going to be insulted, because they're like, you have summoned us from around the world so that you can give us a rah-rah speech. That's not going to go over well. And of course, the worst case scenario is that if it's actually something to get ready for, some big military operation somewhere, or if it's any kind of demand for loyalty, that's got its own level of problem. When they got their oath of office, they declared an oath to the Constitution of the United States. That's already done. There should be no question about loyalty that you have to say it again, because then it's almost implying that your loyalty is not to the Constitution, but to the man that operates in the Oval Office. And that, if you want to put up a situation where they have to be loyal to that man, as opposed to the Constitution of the country that it's governed, everything is based on, you have a new problem here. So I hope that's not the case, but we're going to continue to monitor this. We'll figure it out when it comes time. So keep tuned here, because we'll give you all the news when we have it. Thanks very much, folks. I hope you have a great weekend. Really appreciate you spending time with us on Saturday. And we will look forward to next week with a great lineup of new guests and additional folks that you're comfortable with on the Daniel Davis Deep Dive. See you then.